Everybody wants a wide receiver, but if we all know that running backs are how you win your league, let's find out who the top running back candidates in the 2024 draft class are now. Let's go.
Let's go.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Dynasty After Dark. We're your hosts, Calvin Timms and Dale Terry, and we are continuing with the rookies here today, and we're going to be talking about everyone's favorite position, the running backs. Running backs are getting no love the last couple of years, man, and it's pretty crazy. I know I heard on the fantasy footballers the stat that this year had the most rushing attempts of the last decade or something like that. It was crazy.
Wild.
Which is it kind of tracks, man. If you this last year felt weird, and I don't know if it's because of all the quarterback injuries or if that running backs are starting to make a comeback. Everything in the NFL is cyclical, guys. It will come back that these running backs become a very important part of the game again. We just need to make sure we're on the start of that trend, not the tail end of it, right? But running backs just get no love, and this draft class is no different whatsoever. People do not like this draft class. I've got about 5 guys that I actually really like, and I love the value on them because you don't have to spend a first on maybe any of them. There's probably one that's going to be a first-round pick, but
maybe.
But yeah, we'll get into that here in just a minute. Before we get into that, Dale, how are we doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing really good. I'm excited to talk about some of these running backs. Personally, for me, it was scraping for a lot of these running backs.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good, but some of the name value really went out with Trevion Henderson. Unfortunately,
I know he would have been my number one.
With him
man.
and Sanders, yeah.
Raheem. I forgot about Raheem.
Yeah.
I forgot, dude.
Yeah.
Dude, those two going back.
Yes.
Hurts so bad.
It was big. So
it's gonna be good for next year, though.
It's gonna be great. So Trevion's staying at Ohio State, so that's something to look out for. And then Sanders transferred to South Carolina.
Yep. And he is going to be someone to watch from Arkansas, right? He was on one of my big players this last year, right?
He was from Arkansas, but then he did transfer to South Carolina.
Right. Yeah. Yep. Exactly. So, the running back class did take a little bit of a hit compared to the wide receiver. Now, it is a very good wide receiver class, like every other year. But I think there's some pretty good names to talk about here. Now, before we get into the running backs, I know you guys are anxious, but we're going to be coming out with a lot of content here over the next couple of weeks. So if you guys can, if you're listening to this on audio, I ask you guys to please go over to our YouTube channel, Dynasty After Dark YouTube channel. Please subscribe, and you can hear all of our content as soon as it comes out. I'm going to be putting out extra videos over the next couple of weeks. We're going to be doing 2 a week. We're going to be ramping up the podcast like crazy. And I'm going to be putting out a couple of extra ones. They're going to be fun, more exploratory type of episodes. Like, what should the Bears do with the 101? Should they trade, or should they keep Fields, or should they go for Caleb Williams? Conversations like that. Fixing the Chargers franchise. How do we make this team not suck every single year where they have the most talent in the NFL? I'm going to be coming out with a lot of videos like that. And I want to push you guys over to the YouTube channel where you guys will be able to listen to that. It's going to be YouTube only exclusive content. So make sure you guys subscribe. If you're a new listener, we do appreciate you guys. Make sure you like, comment on the video. It just helps us with the algorithm and gets it out there to more people so we can continue to grow and give you guys amazing content. The other day, we put out our quarterback rankings, our initial quarterback rankings, and we kind of talked about some of their fantasy value as well going through there. So we're going to do the same thing here as we're going through these running backs. But, today we're going to talk about probably about 10, 11 running backs. And we'll really get into some good conversation on these guys, and I'm excited for that. So, Dale, any last thoughts?
I'm ready to jump into it.
All right, let's start at the top. And, this is going to be our rankings for these guys. This is not going to be the consensus rankings because I already know who the number 1 and number 2 consensus guys are going to be, and is not our number 1. I don't think it's either one of our guys number 1, but I think the number 1 guy that will be drafted by the community will be Blake Corum from Michigan. So we're going to talk about him in just a minute. We have the same number 1. Surprisingly, we did not talk about our list before.
No, we did not.
Before we got on here, but we both have Braelon Allen out of Wisconsin as our number 1. And This guy is so disrespected. It is insane. He's going to destroy the combine. He is going to absolutely murder the combine. And you want to know why? This dude is a physical freak of nature. He's Derrick Henry reincarnated. The dude's 6'2", 240 pounds. You're like, 240. He's probably a little fat, you know? The dude 2 years ago set a running back power clean and squat record. He is Nick Chubb in terms of squat records. This dude put up 610 on the squat rack, which beats out Saquon Barkley, his school record back when he was an amazing generational prospect. And yet nobody seems to care that Braelon Allen is just an amazing prospect. The dude is a thick boy. He is a big dude. He's a power back. He's not the best with the receiving. He can catch, but he doesn't have natural hands is the best way I would kind of say that. But, you know, Wisconsin has been RBU for a couple years now. And dude, he's just, what am I missing on Braelon Allen that people are out on him? Like, I just don't understand the negatives on him necessarily.
I think part of it was his injuries this last year. And he
still played 11 games.
That's true. And like, I don't feel that he dominated like the Wisconsin backs that we've seen in years past, like with the Melvin Gordon years and,
That's true. That is true.
you know, and stuff like that. So, but also those are different Wisconsin teams, you know, as well. So I love Braelon Allen, and he, fun fact, he actually just turned 20.
I know, he's so young, 20. Man. He is so young.
So like, he's not even a grown ass man. to be honest, he's not. So, you know, he's a very smooth running back. You know, he runs violent, which is good and a bad thing. You know, it's definitely not Isaiah Pacheco violent. That's
but he's built for it too, though.
Yes.
Like,
yeah, he is.
He's 240. He's a linebacker playing running back. Like, he has the natural fluidity of a running back with a linebacker's body. That's amazing, guys. That is, you are going to want this guy because he is the next Derrick Henry. When he rushes for 2,000 yards, you're going to say, "How did we see this coming?"
Right.
It's crazy. I was looking at consensus rankings on him earlier, and he's like the RB7. Like, what are we doing, guys?
It's really low.
It's a bad running back class, and you have the number it's a beast of a prospect that's 7.
Yes.
So that's how we feel about Braelon Allen. He's very good.
Absolutely. Yes.
He's really good, man. Yes. I will say the knock on Braelon Allen, and there's some guys here that are very good pass catchers in this class, and we'll talk about them. But he's not a good pass catcher. Doesn't really matter.
I think he's better than you think. You know,
I think he's clunky.
He has pretty soft hands. You know, I feel he's a playmaker, but
it's hard to tell.
It also goes to his size. You know, he's a bigger guy. He's a bigger guy than some of these guys we're seeing.
That is true, and maybe that kind of changes your perspective on it. But it's also Wisconsin. Like, he had a total of 49 receptions over 3 years. Like, they just don't really throw to the running back in Wisconsin. Right. So we don't really have a great sample size in terms of what he's able to do with it. But that size, that if you can get him the ball in space, the dude is a freak of nature. So enough about Braelon Allen. He's clearly both of our number ones. Number 2 is where we actually start to diverge here, and pretty drastically. Our rankings are aligned at the top here, and then it goes crazy after that. So we're going to go through this. I'm trying to think of the best way on the fly here to do this, but we'll kind of just go through my list here, and we're going to kind of talk about them where they're on your list, and we'll show the list at the end of how we kind of rank these guys. But your number 2 is going to be Jonathan Brooks, who is my number 5, right? My number 2 is going to be Trey Benson, who's your number 4. So we clearly see these guys much differently. Trey Benson, for me, and the reason why I like him so much is he's more of a traditional running back in my book. And I think that he's got the size that I really like from a running back. He's 6'1", 211 pounds listed. He'll probably come out a little bit bigger than that. You know, he's give him a couple of months before the combine, and he'll be able to beef up a little bit. I do believe in that. You know, played at Oregon, didn't play he was a redshirt freshman, played in 2021. Really didn't play too much, only had 6 rushing attempts that whole year. Transfers to Florida State, and I will say the transfer portal gets a lot of hate, but this is one of the good things of the transfer portal, right? Plays 26 games for Florida State, has 1,900 rushing yards, averaging 6.1 a clip, which is pretty good. 23 rushing touchdowns, 33 receptions for 371 yards. He's got good hands, in my opinion. Like, he is averaging 11.2 yards per carry, which is pretty good. You go back to Braelon Allen. I don't think he's a bad receiver, but he was averaging like 4 a catch. So, a big difference between the catching ability of Trey Benson and Braelon Allen, where I think Trey Benson's a little bit more well-rounded than Braelon Allen. Braelon Allen is a rushing specialist, where Benson is a little bit more well-rounded. So that's why I like him so much as my number 2. Again, he's a little bit more traditional. What are your negatives on him? Why do you have him down a little bit lower?
Yeah, I like Trey Benson, and for all the reasons you said, I think the big thing with me is his injury history.
Mm-hmm.
In 2020, he did tear his ACL, MCL, both his lateral and medial meniscus in his knee, and his hamstring.
Yep. But he came
That's
back
a pretty-
the next year. In
Well,
2021, he didn't really play much, but he came back the last
he
2
did.
years for Florida State and played 26
I
games.
don't disagree with that, but like that's still a major injury, and it's a likelihood of re-injury on some of that is I'm going to say it's significant, but it's a real thing. So
yeah, I would just point to counter that, and I do hear you on that. I do hear you. The way I would counter that is Nick Chubb, and obviously Nick Chubb had that horrific knee injury this last year, but that was a freak of nature hit. Like, he got turned 90 degrees on that tackle. But he had the same thing. His rookie year had that horrific knee injury. Or I think it was maybe his sophomore year he had the horrific knee injury. Came back and was playing well, and then came to the NFL. Never really re-injured that leg because he was able to get it fully healthy until this last year. So Nick Chubb was able to dominate after he got healthy again. And I kind of see that similar trajectory for Trey Benson here. I do hear you, though, that the re-injury risk is always there, right? It's in the back of your mind.
Yeah, and I think that's a big thing for me. I feel he's a good runner. I don't think I like Braelon Allen's pass catching ability more than Trey Benson's personally.
Sure.
I think he benefited by playing. Also benefited by playing in a pretty bad ACC conference.
Sure.
But you still play the games. It is what it is. So I think he's he's a capable back, but I think there are some things to be weary of.
Fair enough. All right, let's go to your number 2, Jonathan Brooks, who is my number 5. Why do you like him so much more than me, for example?
I would say of the backs that I've seen, he probably has one of the best, pass catching abilities.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's going to serve him very, very well. I'm not saying he's going to be like a Bijan level, hype that we had last year by any means.
Sure.
It's not really even that. So, I think he's I think he's a pretty good overall back. He has a pretty good IQ. He's a playmaker with the ball in his hands.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a huge thing. Is just just having that ability.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, like we don't have a huge sample size with him.
I know.
With
that's the
with
big
him being
downside
the
for
third
me,
string
right?
last year. He was probably the third, fourth string last year because of
Bijan
and Roshan Johnson.
Yep.
So we weren't able to see a lot of them, but of what we saw, it was pretty good.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still a very limited route tree with Texas, so it's kind of hard to see that. But I think
Texas
overall,
played really well this year too, like really well.
yes, they played better than last year.
They made the playoff, right? Like they did make it.
Yeah. So I think the big thing though is that I know we have our one is the same, but I kind of feel these guys from like 1 to 5 to 6 are, I would say 2 to 5 to 6 are pretty, I feel could be very interchangeable right now.
Yeah,
and
that's where I hear that, and that's where it starts with 3 for me. Like Like, I do think Trey Benson is a little bit above these other guys, but,
Yeah.
that I hear your arguments for that. For me, Jonathan Brooks, the biggest thing for him and the reason why he's 5 for me, again, you're right. We didn't get to see a ton of production from him because he was behind Roshan, he was behind Bijan
Hmm.
for the last couple of years, and those guys are really good. They're really good.
Yeah.
But this last year, he has the opportunity. He comes out and he kind of takes it by the horns. 187 carries for 1,100 yards, 10 touchdowns, 25 receptions for 286 receiving yards. Does get injured though, and that's kind of a unfortunate situation for him. I think it ultimately might push him down the board a little bit. When is he? What was his injury? Do you remember?
I think it was an ACL, I
That's what
believe.
I thought so too. So, he played most of this last year. He played at least 11 games. I can't remember exactly when the injury happened, but he's not going to be healthy to start next year. You really don't want him to be. I think it's going to push him down the draft board pretty heavily. So he's going to go probably like 5th, 6th round in the draft, and that's unfortunate for him because I do like him. I think he's fluid, but the draft
Hmm.
capital plus the injury coming off of that, it's just a long shot for him to ever really have a chance in the NFL, which is why initially, after the draft, if he ends up going in like 3rd, 4th round, okay, yep, I'm all aboard with this guy. But I think for me the current injury is just what kind of pushes him
Yeah,
down a little bit for
I
me.
think he's gonna be. It was an ACL, and it was in mid-November.
Okay, so maybe he gets back.
So he's it's gonna be a close recovery for training camp.
Hmm.
I think they'll
Yeah,
probably
it just
ease him
sucks
in.
because he can't do the
Yeah,
combine. You know what I mean? Like all he can
that's
do is
true.
interviews.
That's true. That's
But
true.
we'll see
But
where he gets
yeah,
drafted. We'll
yeah,
see. We'll see. He's a good player. He is a
yeah.
very good player. I
Yes,
don't want to knock
absolutely.
Jonathan Brooks at all. And if it wasn't for that injury, he would be probably my number 3 right behind Benson. But it's just that injury scares me a little bit in terms
Sure.
of his draft capital, which is going to be important in terms of opportunity for the NFL. Because
Right.
if he can get an opportunity, I think he can take it. But, that's what scares me a little bit. All right, Blake Corum is my number 3 here. And, a lot of people are going to probably have him as their number 1. And I mean, I think we can already pretty much line him up to be the Chargers' next running back. Jim Harbaugh gets hired with the Chargers. There's no first round running backs. Chargers are probably going to take him in round 2 or round 3. I can pretty much confidently say that because Austin Eckler will be gone, and they really don't have a run game after Austin Eckler. So, and he's Harbaugh's guy, right? But Blake Corum, there's some red flags for me. He's a little bit smaller. He's 5'8", projected to be 200 pounds. So he's thick, he's kind of like a Clyde Edwards-Helaire a little bit there. He was good in college. He was sustainably good. Clyde was kind of a one-year wonder, but dude, I don't think he's a natural catcher, receiver of the ball. And I don't, with that size, man, it always makes me a little nervous to have a primary ball carrier to be that small. Like, I'm not saying that it can't happen. Like, Christian McCaffrey is like 5'11", 200 pounds, right? So it can happen that he can be a workhorse back, but this guy was a workhorse back for Michigan, and I don't see that same role in the NFL. And that's why I'm a little bit down on him, but I think he's going to have good draft capital and good opportunity that is going to put him up there too. It's kind of a balancing act right now for me. What are your thoughts on Corum?
Um, I will let some of my bias show. I'm not a big. I mean,
Oh yeah, you hate Michigan.
yeah, yeah, with a fiery passion, and once they get to a league, it's to the league. I may not hate them as much, but
Right.
it is what it is. But
Right.
I do know that he's very good in short yardage. He does have the home run speed that you like to see.
Hmm.
He has good vision, but also he played behind a fantastic offensive line.
Yeah,
It
and
was
and
it was it
LA
was
does
it
not
was it
have
was
that.
yeah, it was a top 5 in the nation. It was pretty much his whole time at Michigan. So, I don't I always felt that like if any running back in the nation, if I needed 1 yard, I would want Blake Corum. I'll just say that because when he is in the short yardages, he's kind of like who was who was the guy that was called Muscle Hamster back in the day? It's like
Oh, I know who you're talking about. I can't think of
yes,
Doug
yeah,
Martin.
I can't.
Doug Martin.
Doug Martin, thank you. Yes, yes, I kind of think of him when I think of Blake Corum. He's a small, stocky guy that he's quick, but I mean, his tape's not going to wow you, but he's still going to do really well. And I do see some of Corum's traits translating into the league. But also he's going to have a weaker offensive line. He's not a very good pass catching option. He's pretty poor at it. He just wasn't asked to do it. And with him having a smaller frame, that's a good and a bad thing. So, I like him, but I like him less because of um I mean, it's not just because he's a Michigan player, personally.
Right.
It's because, he has good traits, but also not good enough traits for fantasy.
Right. Yep. I hear you. Now we're gonna go from him, who is not a natural pass catcher, to a guy who I really like from a pass catching standpoint. You're a little bit lower. Will Shipley he's from Clemson. He is your number 7, but he's my number 4. And this dude was a pass catching freak. Through 3 years, he had 85 receptions for college. That's really good. That is really good. That means they trusted him to utilize him in that role, because not a lot of players will do that. But I think he's a little subpar as a rusher, but he's more of a receiving threat. So, from a fantasy production standpoint, that's where I think he's got a little bit of an edge over some of these other guys in a weaker class that, hopefully he goes somewhere that they can put him in that scenario, in that situation. Sure. Like you swap him with, you put him on the Chargers instead of Blake Corum, and I think it's a much better landing spot, situation. And I think he would be much better for the team, and given all his abilities to produce for fantasy as well. So, Will Shipley, he's not an amazing. I will say though, he did have 31 rushing touchdowns for not being an amazing rusher. Like, he's not a power back. Like, he's a smaller guy, but that's pretty good for the fact that he is a little bit smaller.
It is.
Touchdowns.
It is. I mean, I will say that the years he was at Clemson wasn't as notable as they have been in the past.
It was right after Lawrence left that he kind of came in. So
he was there, and he kind of emerged, and he really was the guy. There's not really a lot of talent on that team. It's just kind of him. And that's I mean I do agree. He is a really good pass catcher. He's good in open space, like he has those quick bursts.
Mm-hmm.
But he's not an overwhelming guy. Like, he's not. I think he's a good pass catcher, but that's
right. That's kind of all he's really good at. He's okay as a rusher, but we're throwing back. Who he kind of reminds me of is Danny. Played for the Chargers. Danny. What's his name? Oh, it's gonna bug me. It's gonna bug me until I remember it. But there was a really good running back for the Chargers who was such a receiving threat that. That's who he reminds me of. And I do believe that he can go somewhere for fantasy and he can just produce for fantasy. So we'll see where he gets drafted, but I like him a little bit more.
Danny Woodhead.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
Yep.
Danny Woodhead. That's who he reminds me of a lot, because Danny Woodhead was a little bit smaller as well.
Yes.
But yeah, we'll see where he goes, but I like him for fantasy just because of the receiving threat that he is.
Yes.
All right, continuing down this list a little bit here. Let's talk about your number 3 really quickly before we lose sight of him. Bucky Irving. And, we are completely opposite on this player. Like, you love Bucky Irving, and that's what's so funny about this rookie class, right? Like, you're really high on Jonathan Brooks. You're really high on Bucky Irving. I'm really high on Trey Benson. I'm really high on Will Shipley, and we have these guys just completely flipped in our final ranking or our initial rankings, right? So, what is sell me on Bucky Irving here?
He is a not as fast Devon Achan. It's kids. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
I don't think anybody's going to be really as
Yep.
quick and as has that burst as Devon Achan did.
True.
Coming out, but he's a quick guy. He's
Yep.
a playmaker in space. Unfortunately, I mean he's a decent pass catcher, but unfortunately it was a lot of slip screens, a lot of quick dump offs, and he made people miss.
He did have
So
56 catches this last year, which is pretty
yes,
good.
yes. So his vision's really good. He's he has a quick burst.
And
And like
79 or sorry, 87 catches over the last 2 years. That is
yeah,
crazy for college.
yes. And that's why I view him a little bit higher because of his pass catching ability. It's not like he has a huge route tree and he's able to do all these great things. But I think for him it's the biggest struggle is with him having a smaller frame. Kind of getting in the trenches.
Yeah.
I don't really think that's his game. Is in between the tackles. It's everything outside.
Sure. That's where, it's funny because like him and Will Shipley are pretty much the same skill set, right?
Sure.
I do think that he's a little bit better as a rusher, but I think he also benefited from a little bit of an easier, better team than Will Shipley had, right? So it's funny because Oregon, Bo Nix was so good at throwing the ball the last couple of years that it really opened things up in the rushing game, and that's where he kind of thrived a little bit more. You go over to Clemson, and Will Shipley did not have that benefit of the doubt that from the passing game. He was kind of, like you mentioned, he was one of the only shining stars on that whole team. So, he's going to be an interesting player. And again, these guys are very interchangeable, and the draft locations will determine a lot of this. The combine will help a lot. But yeah, man, he's an interesting player for sure.
Yes.
The question is, so really quickly, I want to take a quick little break here to talk about this from a fantasy perspective, right? Braelon Allen, Jonathan Brooks, Bucky Irving, Trey Benson, Blake Corum, Will Shipley. Are any of these guys late first round picks for a one quarterback league? I would say in a one quarterback, Braelon Allen I'd be willing to take. Trey Benson I would be willing to take in the first, draft spot pending, obviously.
I would say 1 to 2 guys.
Okay.
Other than that, I don't.
Like you'd be willing to take Jonathan Brooks if you got decent draft capital.
Yeah,
in the first?
either. Yeah, probably.
I'd rather take him or Bucky. I have a feeling your final rankings, you're gonna have Bucky above Jonathan. You love
probably.
this guy.
Yeah, I mean, I think the league is shifting to these quick twitch guys.
Sure.
I mean, it's starting to do that, and these more like I guess you can say like it's a Dolphins offense. It's all these track guys.
Yeah, speed guys.
Speed. And I think that's where the league's gonna keep transitioning to for a while. And that's why I'm a little bit down on Trey Benson and Blake Corum and another guy that we're gonna talk about here in a minute. These bruisers, are a little bit further down because they don't catch the balls.
Ironically, except for Braelon Allen,
except for Braelon Allen,
because he's a physical freak, man. I'm willing to bet on physical freaks.
And the difference with Braelon Allen is that he had a very, very young breakout age.
Oh yeah,
a very young breakout age.
He was what, 17? Like if he just turned 20, he would have been 17, right?
Yes.
So
yeah. So I feel differently about him than some of these other guys that have had a later breakout.
Dude, he did a 610 squat at 17.
He's a physical freak, man.
I'm lucky if I can break like 200, and I'm 34. That's crazy. Man. Yeah. That's crazy.
Wild.
Gosh. I don't like squats, guys. I'm not that out of shape. I just don't like squats. No, I think in a super flex league, from a value perspective, Braelon Allen is our number one. I'd be willing to take him like early second. Luckily, and that's why I love this running back class. Like Trey Benson is probably going to go as the number one in a super flex league at early second round pick. Braelon Allen, you'll probably be able to get him with like the 2.5, 2.6, unless something crazy happens where he goes higher than we all expect. But Blake Corum and Trey Benson, I think, are going to go much higher than Braelon Allen. And like, you'll be able to get this guy with like a mid-second, which is going to be amazing.
Yes.
Chef's kiss.
Agreed.
All right, let's continue with the prospects here. There's a couple guys. I want to talk about these two guys together a little bit here. And Audric Estime and Jalen Wright. Audric Estime from Notre Dame. Jalen Wright was with Tennessee. These guys are interesting. I think both of these guys are kind of sleepers and worth watching because I think that they could really establish themselves as an up-and-coming candidate. Audric Estime, he's a more traditional sized running back. He's 6'1", 215 pounds. He played at Notre Dame, which is a good school. They always get decent matchups and everything. He was an okay rusher. He wasn't anything special in that regard. He was pretty solid as a pass catcher as well, but he was a touchdown monster. He had 30 touchdowns in the last 2 years, which is pretty good. He's someone that is interesting. Again, we'll see how he kind of projects in the combine, but there's not a lot of size and beef in this class, and I think that's why I like him a little bit more. He's kind of a more, again, like a David Montgomery, a more traditional style running back here. And Jalen Wright on the flip side, this guy is explosive. He's tinier, but Jahmyr Gibbs, who we all love and a lot of people think is a top 3 running back for Dynasty, right? And I don't blame him after what he's been able to do the last couple of weeks. But, he was only 5'11", 200 pounds, 199. I think he was 6 foot 199. Jalen Wright is 5'11", 200 as well. So he's a little bit smaller. He's Christian McCaffrey. He's Jahmyr Gibbs. But this dude is explosive, man. This guy, I was watching some of his tape, and it's just the way he is able to explode. He's like Tajay Spears, for example, or some of these other guys. It's just, he hits it, and he hits it hard. He's not an amazing receiving back, but he did take a massive step forward in that department this last year. I do think a lot of that was screens, if I remember right. And it's Tennessee, so they gimmick these guys open all over the place. Yeah. But he went from 2 catches in his sophomore year to 22 catches this last year. So, a big step up, and that they trusted him in that department, which is a good sign. I do think that he can catch the ball. I just don't know how well because it's Tennessee, right? But the guy is just explosive, and if you're able to do the numbers that he's doing, that is something that stands out to me, at least from a sleeper standpoint for this guy. What are your thoughts on these two guys?
Yeah, with Audric Estime, I like him as well. Like, I think he's a very good goal line back. He kind of gives me shades of like a Tyler Algier kind of thing.
Right.
He's not gonna wow you. He's a pretty patient runner, which is a good and a bad thing. But he has some quickness, but not really the high end burst that you really want to see.
Mm-hmm.
So that worries me. I feel
the
he's
combine
pretty
will be big for him, right?
Yes, it's gonna be huge, and I think it's gonna depend how like his 40 time, honestly.
Yeah, I can see that
with him. It's gonna be his 40 time. I think he's a good runner. But I think passing, the passing game's a little to be desired, a little bit, So, and he does fumble. So, that's something to just be aware of. Like, he does have ball control problems. So
that's never good.
It's never good. It is never good. And then with Jalen Wright, as some people that are in Devy leagues know, that there's a guy called Bruce Feldman who has his annual freaks list. Yeah, he has a freaks list, and I like to look at this because that kind of gives me a gauge on who I can look at these skill positions, who's going to be like these physical freak guys. It's for instance like Marvin Harrison Jr. is on there. Other players have been on there, and other players we've talked about have been on there. So, and with that, Jalen Wright's on there.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think he's a very good playmaker. He's a guy that's gonna lower his pads and go. He runs with violence. He runs with a lot of oomph. But I think with him having a slider build, that could be a problem.
Mm-hmm.
I think with him, like he just really needs to bulk up and just
Not
and
it just
just
needs
kind
to
of
go
show
to a
it. Yeah.
good scheme, right? If he goes to a
Yeah.
good system, like imagine the Niners take him, and I get it, like, oh, that's a terrible idea, but Christian McCaffrey's getting older, man. He is getting up there.
Yeah. Yeah. He
But
is.
like you imagine him in the Niners offense, like the way that they could put him in
Right.
space, or even the Dolphins, right, as a Raheem
Yep.
Mostert replacement, like
Yep.
those type of systems, like, or here's a good one, here's a great one, Minnesota Vikings. Let's get him on Minnesota, man.
That could be fun.
Like
Yeah.
Jalen Wright in Minnesota would be very, very good, and that'd be like a third round pick for them. Like,
Yeah.
but I think there's a lot of landing spots where they could utilize his skill set really, really well. That would be fantasy relevant. So we'll see. I think he's gonna blow up the combine. I think he's gonna be very good in the combine
Yeah.
here in the next month. But his explosion numbers, dude, to me they stand out. That's the biggest thing I
Yep.
saw from him was his
That's gonna be the big
explosive
thing.
ability.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's rapid fire the last couple guys here. We have a different list for the last few. I've only got two more guys that I even wanted to even really talk about, but Ray Davis and Frank Gore Jr. Frank Gore is just tiny,
Yep.
man. Name value's
Yeah. He
there.
is.
Maybe he gets drafted a little bit higher than because of the name value, but I don't think he's actually that good compared to his dad. He's kind of a grinder and he's tiny, which doesn't really stand out well to me. Ray Davis is kind of the same thing. He's smaller. He's not as tiny as Frank Gore, but he's also just kind of a grinder. He's not really he doesn't really stand out in any one category. But after those top 8, it really falls off
It does.
pretty hard for
It
me.
does.
What are the guys that you really wanted to kind of mention here?
I mean, I'm a homer, and I will say that. Unfortunately, I as a analyst, have to be aware of my biases. I really like Mayan Williams. I like what I saw with him.
Mm-hmm.
I personally wish he would have stayed another year. I think he needed another year of development. I really like the hard runners and the
Sure.
violent runners that are going to get those extra yards where they could slip out of a tackle. And I did see him improve, in the screen game, and I think what's huge for a lot of NFL teams is your willingness to pass block.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's what keeps young players on the field is your willingness to pass block. And
Yep. You either have to be
I
really, really good or really good at blocking.
exactly. And with Mayan, I don't think he's going to get a draft capital that you really want, but I think he's someone to highlight and to just be aware of.
Sure.
And then the other guy is Dylan. I looked up the pronunciation of his name earlier, and I can't.
Laub.
I think yeah, Laub.
We'll say that.
He's from the University of New Hampshire.
Okay.
I think it's a very small school. It's probably a D2 school, either D2 D3. He's another guy that is a fairly quick guy. He's a playmaker.
Sure.
He's a playmaker. Like he's a guy that runs hard.
He wasn't even on my list yet, so this is an interesting one for me. I'll have to check him out after this.
So he's just someone to he's just someone to keep an eye on.
Sure.
I feel after it's just like what Calvin said. After these top even 6-7 guys,
Yeah.
I feel it's more of a crapshoot on what it's gonna be.
Yep.
So it's just someone to keep your eye on.
Last guy, Cody Schrader, you wanted to mention really quickly?
Yes, yeah. I got to I got to watch him a little bit in my unfortunate watching of the Cotton Bowl with Ohio State and Missouri. And I got to watch a little bit of him, and he did play really well. He's a sneaky fast guy, but he's not always, he doesn't have the top end speed. He has good vision, a hard runner. I think it's the thing with him is like he just doesn't have necessarily the burst, but but he's a willing pass catcher, which is going to serve him well in the NFL.
Sure. And again, the combine will really make a difference for these guys in terms of their sorting. We'll see what these guys can do, but again, I think in a super flex league, I'm not willing to take any of these guys in the first round. This year's draft class is just too good. We talked about the quarterbacks last time. There's probably it will depend where Michael Pratt, Michael Penix, and Bo Nix, where they ultimately land. But there could be 6 quarterbacks that I'd be willing to take in the first round, potentially. You got Brock Bowers, you've got Malik Neighbors, you've got Rome Odunze, you've got Marvin Harrison Jr., there's a few other receivers we'll talk about on the next episode as well that could potentially be first-round picks. And it's just a very full first round in a super flex league this year. I'm not taking a running back that high. And I think it'll be consensus. The only one I could see really getting up there is if Benson or Corum go like to the Chiefs or, you know what I mean, somewhere crazy that the hype kind of blows up on these guys. So if you need a running back out there and making this actionable for you guys, because a lot of people are trading for draft picks right now or trying to, work your off-season deals and everything like that. My biggest recommendation right now is if you need a running back, trade for like the 2.3 to 2.6, like somewhere in that range. Because I think you'll be able to get a Braelon Allen. I think you'll be able to potentially get a Trey Benson, a Will Shipley, for example. Jalen Wright, you might even be able to get with a 3rd-round pick. He's going to be like my favorite stash grab player in this entire draft, I think. Because we'll see where he goes again, but if you're doing an early draft before the actual NFL draft, you guys are crazy, but, just grab him everywhere you can because I do think this guy is going to make a big splash. Bucky Irvin, for example, is another guy that we're both we both like. But, yeah, if you're trading for draft picks, go for a 2nd rounder right now if you need a running back. And I think that, you can get a lot, even early 3rd. I think a lot of these guys might even be 3rds because we talked about 8 guys in a super flex league. If the entire 2nd round is not going to be made up of running backs, you know what I mean? So there's going to be potentially a quarterback or, 3 or 4 receivers. And there's also maybe a 2nd or 3rd tight end, which we'll talk about when we get to the tight end episode. So, it's going to get full quickly. So, trade for mid, late, early, 2nd, 3rd round, somewhere in there, and just get the guys that fall because running back is not great in this class, but I do think there's a lot of potential. Nobody wants to like these guys, but I do think that some of them will become fantasy studs, right? And we're trying to give you guys the best ideas of who we think will ultimately make their way out. And like we talked about with Jonathan Brooks, I really like Jonathan Brooks. It's going to be a long road for him if he can, if he can get draft capital that he's not terrible. Like if he can get 4th-round draft capital, all right, I'm willing to buy into it a little bit. But, if the injury puts teams off of him, then it's going to be a long road. And maybe he can do it and you can get him for a 4th-round pick or something. But we're just trying to give you guys the best lottery tickets to scratch off on these guys on who's going to become fantasy relevant for years at a time because you're going to need these guys. These guys, the guys, the running backs we have in the NFL, a lot of them are getting older. It's Saquon Barkley. He doesn't have much time left. Christian McCaffrey, he's older again. Derrick Henry, Austin Eckler. A lot of these guys are starting to get older and aging out. So you're getting a lot of new guys, but you can't have a year where none of them are fantasy relevant. It's just not going to happen. So, all right, so last but not least, I'll just show you guys the board here, and this is how it ultimately. Let's go here. This is how it ultimately shook out, and Braelon Allen, both of our number ones, a little bit of a shake up between 2 and 8 for us, but ultimately I think we had the same 7 guys there from 2 to 8. So. I think the only one was Jalen Wright, which I think you'll kind of come around a little bit more on as time goes. But yeah. So let us know your thoughts again on the Twitters, on the YouTubes, and let us know in the comments. Like the video. And again, if you can, just go subscribe to the channel as well because we're going to be putting out a lot of content over the next couple of weeks. And we're excited about it. We definitely are excited about it. So any last thoughts, Dale? All right, let's wrap this thing up. So thank you guys again for joining us. Next week, we're going to have the wide receivers and the tight ends, and then we're going to be getting into some mock drafts, some rankings, all kinds of offseason content. It's going to be a good time. We'll probably talk about the coaching staffs at some point as well. once they're all established. I think 2 teams right now. No, one, just the
team.
The Commanders are
left.
the only ones left at this point. So
yep.
we'll see who they get. But we'll do all kinds of content. If there's a specific type, just let us know. Again, you can find me on Twitter at TDC_Calvin. You can find him at Dynasty_Dale and the podcast at FF After Dark. Until next time, thank you guys so much for listening. Have a good night.
And we all got dreams, we all want things, but what you gonna do for it? How you gonna move for it? What you gonna be?